What happens when a Hollywood legend faces a host who knows no boundaries? This moment on Whoopi Goldberg's talk show went viral, sparking a firestorm of discussion across social media. No one in the studio was prepared for what unfolded, and this event forever changed the perception of where sharp interviews end and personal attacks begin. The studio of The View buzzed with anticipation. Bright spotlights bathed the stage in warm light, and the live audience erupted in applause as Whoopi Goldberg, with her signature charisma, announced the next guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Academy Award winner, director, actor, and founder of the Sundance Film Festival, Robert Redford. The clack of heels on the polished floor, the hum of cameras gliding on rails, and thunderous applause filled the studio. Robert Redford, dressed in a simple yet elegant gray suit, stepped onto the stage with a faint smile. His silver hair and weathered lines added to his charm, a reminder of decades of iconic roles in films like Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and All the President's Men. At 89, he remained an icon, reserved, introspective, with a quiet dignity that commanded the room. Redford was there to promote his new documentary film about environmental conservation, a cause close to his heart through his decades-long activism. The audience hummed with excitement, and co-hosts Sarah Haynes, Sunny Hostin, and Joy Behar smiled warmly as he took a seat on the couch. The atmosphere was convivial, almost festive. But in Whoopi Goldberg's eyes there was a faint glint, a harbinger of the storm to come. "Robert, welcome to The View," Whoopi said, her voice both friendly and laced with a hint of challenge. "You're here to talk about your new film, but I'm sure we've got a lot to dive into." The audience chuckled, but there was a slight edge to their laughter. Redford nodded, his smile polite but guarded. No one yet knew that this episode would go down in television history. The interview began innocently enough. Whoopi asked why Redford had shifted to documentaries after such a storied acting career. He answered calmly, with his characteristic depth, discussing his passion for protecting the environment and the power of art to highlight societal issues. His words were measured but sincere, and the audience listened, rapt. But the mood shifted when Whoopi abruptly changed her tone. "Robert, you talk a lot about saving the planet, about how important it is," she said, leaning forward with a sly smile. "But let's be real. You're a Hollywood star living in luxury, flying private jets, owning estates. Doesn't that seem a bit hypocritical? Preaching environmentalism while leaving such a carbon footprint." The studio fell silent. The hum of the cameras seemed louder in the sudden hush. The audience gasped, and Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably in her seat, casting a quick glance at the producers offstage. Robert Redford raised an eyebrow, his face remaining calm, but a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. He slowly set his glass of water on the table, as if buying time to collect his thoughts. "That's a fair question, Whoopi," he replied, his voice even but with a hint of tension. "I'm not perfect. None of us are. But I try to use my platform to draw attention to issues that matter. My film isn't about pointing fingers, it's about inspiring change." The audience applauded, but Whoopi didn't back down. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Inspiration is great, but is it enough? People want action, not just pretty words from stars living in their bubbles. You say you're for change, but are you ready to change your own lifestyle?" Her tone grew sharper, tinged with sarcasm. Sunny Hostin tried to intervene, her voice soft but nervous. "I think, Whoopi, we can all agree Robert's done a lot for the environmental movement. Maybe we can talk about the film itself?" But Whoopi waved her off, her eyes fixed on Redford. "I just want us to be honest. People are tired of stars preaching one thing and doing another." Redford's hands clenched on his knees, but his face remained composed. He glanced at the audience, as if seeking support, and a few people nodded, though others watched him curiously, waiting for his response. The camera zoomed in, catching a slight tremor in his jaw. The tension in the studio was palpable, and it was clear this was only the beginning. Whoopi, sensing she'd struck a nerve, decided to dig deeper. "You know, Robert, I respect your career. But some people say Sundance has just become another playground for the rich and famous to feel woke without changing anything in the real world. What do you say to that?" The silence in the studio became oppressive. Joy Behar, usually quick with a quip, looked uncomfortable and began flipping through her notes, avoiding eye contact. The audience, torn between shock and curiosity, began whispering, and a few pulled out their phones to record. Producers backstage exchanged anxious glances, one of them raising a hand to an earpiece, awaiting instructions. Redford took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing. Sundance was created to give a voice to independent artists, people who didn't have access to big studios, he said, his voice firmer. It's not perfect, but it's changed the industry. And I don't think it's fair to judge it based on rumors or stereotypes. Whoopi smiled, but her smile was cold. Maybe, but don't you think festivals like that are often more about glamour than real change? You can't deny Hollywood loves to look conscious without always acting the part. This time, the gasp came not just from the audience but from Sarah Haynes, who turned sharply to Whoopi. Come on, Whoopi, that's a bit unfair, she said, trying to defuse the situation. But Whoopi ignored her, keeping her gaze locked on Redford. The cameras hummed, capturing every movement, every expression. One operator zoomed in on Redford's hands, now gripping the armrests of his chair tightly. Redford leaned forward, his voice quieter but carrying weight. I'm not here to defend Hollywood. I'm here to talk about what we can do for the planet. If you want to call me a hypocrite, then call us all hypocrites. But at least I'm trying. The audience erupted in applause, but Whoopi didn't relent. Trying? She echoed, raising an eyebrow. Or is that just a convenient excuse for someone who can afford to look conscious? The studio froze again. Producers backstage began whispering frantically, and the security team near the exit tensed, as if sensing the situation spiraling out of control. Robert Redford looked directly at Whoopi, and in his eyes was a spark, not of anger, but of resolve. What happened next shocked everyone. The studio of The View was on the verge of eruption. The tension, building with every passing minute, had reached its peak. Robert Redford sat across from Whoopi Goldberg, his gaze steady but calm, while her eyes burned with challenge. The audience held its breath, sensing something unforgettable was about to unfold. The cameras hummed, capturing every movement, every expression. Sarah Haynes and Sunny Hostin sat frozen, while Joy Behar nervously tapped her pen on the table. Producers backstage exchanged panicked gestures, and security near the exit braced themselves, ready to step in. Whoopi, unflinching, repeated her question with a hint of sarcasm. So, Robert, is it all just pretty words? Do you really believe your films and festivals are changing the world while you live in luxury? Her voice cut through the air, and the studio grew so quiet that the click of her microphone being adjusted echoed. Robert Redford slowly rose from his chair. His movements were deliberate, filled with dignity. He squared his shoulders, and in that moment, it seemed the weight of his decades-long career and life experience filled the studio. The audience fell silent, cameras zoomed in, catching a slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from passion. He looked directly at Whoopi, then turned his gaze to the audience, as if addressing every person in the room and beyond the screens. I don't claim to be a saint, Whoopi, he began, his voice quiet but cutting through the silence like a blade. I live a comfortable life, and I don't hide that. But I've spent 50 years trying to use my platform to speak about what matters. Sundance gave a voice to those Hollywood ignored. My films aren't just entertainment, they make people think. And if you think that's not enough, then tell me, what have you done with your platform besides throwing accusations? The studio erupted. Some audience members gasped, others burst into applause, and a few began recording on their phones, their faces alight with shock and awe. Whoopi, clearly unprepared for such a retort, faltered for a moment. Her smile vanished, and she pursed her lips, searching for a response. Sarah Haynes tried to intervene, raising a hand. Okay, let's dial it back a bit. We're all here to talk about important things. But her voice was drowned out by the audience's roar. Redford continued, his voice growing firmer. You call me a hypocrite? Fine. But let's look at this show. You sit here, under these lights, with millions watching, and instead of having a real conversation, you choose to attack. For what? Ratings? Clicks? If you want to talk about change, start with yourself. Ask what you're doing to make the world better, instead of tearing others down to look smarter. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Even the cameras seemed to stop humming. Whoopi sat motionless, her face a mix of shock and anger. Joy Behar, usually quick-witted, opened her mouth but said nothing. The audience was split. Some looked at Redford with respect, others at Whoopi, awaiting her response. A producer backstage waved frantically, signaling the operators to keep the cameras on Redford, whose eyes burned with quiet, unyielding resolve. Redford adjusted his jacket and stepped toward the edge of the stage. I came here to talk about the planet, about our children's future. But if you want a circus, I'm not playing along. He turned to the audience, his voice softening but still resonant. I hope you'll watch my film. Not for me, but to think about what we can do together. Thank you. With that, he removed his microphone, placed it on the couch, and walked toward the exit. The clack of his shoes on the floor rang out like gunshots in the silence. Security parted to let him pass, producers whispered frantically, and the audience erupted in applause, not all, but many. Some shouted words of support, others sat stunned. Whoopi, still seated, tried to regain control, saying, Well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after the break. But her voice trembled, and it was clear she'd lost the upper hand. As Robert Redford disappeared backstage, the studio exploded with whispers and chatter. Audience members exchanged glances, pulling out phones to post videos on social media. The hashtag Redford vs. Whoopi was already trending, and clips of his speech spread like wildfire. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the chaos. Sunny Hostin tried to say something, but her words were lost in the noise, and Sarah Haynes looked as if she wanted to sink into the floor. Joy Behar, finally recovering, tried to lighten the mood. Well, that's definitely going down in TV history. But her laugh was nervous and fell flat. Backstage, producers scrambled like a beehive. One shouted into an earpiece. This is viral, but we're in trouble. We need to do something. Security escorted Redford to his dressing room, but he walked with his head held high, not looking back. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed a weariness, not from the conflict, but from the need to defend his legacy to those who saw only the surface. Whoopi, left on stage, tried to steer the show back on track, but her usual confidence was fraying. All right, we respect different opinions, don't we? She said to the audience, but her words rang hollow. Some clapped in support, but others looked at her with reproach. The moment Redford walked out became more than a TV event. It became a symbol of standing up for dignity in a world where provocation often replaces dialogue. In the hours that followed, clips of Redford's speech flooded the internet. Social media erupted with debates. Some called him a hero for putting a provocateur in her place. Others argued Whoopi was right to ask tough questions. Headlines screamed, Robert Redford storms off The View after epic showdown. And, Whoopi Goldberg versus Hollywood, who won? Redford's environmental message, which he'd come to share, gained new life. His documentary became a trending topic, though not without debates about his personal lifestyle. Whoopi's reputation took a hit. Some fans praised her boldness, but many criticized her for crossing a line. The View found itself in the spotlight, but not as the producers had hoped. Redford himself offered no comment on the incident, but his silence only amplified the weight of his words in the studio. Social media buzzed with quotes from his speech, especially the line, Ask what you're doing to make the world better. This clash left an open question. Does a host have the right to cross boundaries for ratings? Did Redford do the right thing by walking out? And most importantly, can we judge others without looking at ourselves? Share your thoughts in the comments. Who was right in this showdown? And don't forget to subscribe to catch more stories that make us think about what truly matters.